The Weeaboo Festa. Welcome, my fellow One Piece fans. I just watched the new One Piece movie the other day, so I'm gonna give you my thoughts on the film. I'll start off with a non-spoiler review, and then I'll give you a Weeaboo warning when I'm about to get into spoilers. This was the first One Piece film I've seen in the theaters, but not the first anime film I've seen in theaters. And just like the other anime films I've seen in the theaters, it was quite the experience. My brother, friend, and I knew that we were among an interesting crowd when one of the guys walked into the theater wearing a straw hat and screaming, "Stampede!" That was just a taste of things to come, as throughout the movie there were a couple of extremely excited fans making strange noises and comments throughout the movie. To be honest, that was probably the funniest part of the movie. The movie had funny moments throughout as well, but there's nothing quite like a fellow weeaboo making excited otaku noises in the middle of a crowded movie theater. Ah! One of the biggest highlights of the film was the art and animation. When I saw the film's visuals were similar to the recent Dragon Ball Super Broly movie, I was extremely hyped, as that was one of the most visually pleasing anime content I've ever seen. The movie did end up looking amazing, though I don't think its visuals were quite on the level of the Broly movie. Though the one thing I preferred in this film was the lack of CG during the fight scenes. That was one of the biggest downsides of the Broly movie. And while this movie did have some CG, it was implemented in an appropriate manner, and didn't stand out in a negative way. Along with the great visuals came great action. The fights and other big set pieces were done well, and there were some extremely epic scenes. The voice work was well done as well. I watched the dubbed version, and while many people may condemn me for not being a true weeaboo for doing so, you have to realize that on such a big screen, it's hard to read the subtitles while still taking in the entire picture. Plus, I didn't even realize there was an option and just picked the most convenient time at the closest theater. The plot itself was pretty basic, so don't expect any crazy storytelling. The movie isn't connected to the main story, so it was basically a long, high-quality filler episode with a lot of fan service. That's not necessarily a bad thing, as sometimes you just want to watch your favorite characters get together and do something crazy. But since the movie isn't really canon, there's not much world building to be had, and none of the events that happened in this movie will actually matter in the future. Speaking of seeing your favorite characters, that's one thing this film had in abundance. Characters. Lots and lots of characters. A good majority of the characters we've met throughout the entirety of One Piece made an appearance in this movie, so I believe a lot of people enjoy seeing all of the characters they've come to love. One guy in particular in our theater kept enthusiastically screaming out the name of every single character as they made their appearance for the first time. So if you're like that guy, you'll probably get a kick out of all the different characters. I enjoyed seeing all of the familiar faces as well, but having all these characters in one film also has a downside to it. The screen time between all of them gets spread extremely thin. Almost every character only gets a few minutes of actual screen time at best, and the only characters with actual noteworthy screen time are probably Luffy and the main villain he fights against. Even the other Straw Hats don't really get much screen time. So while a lot of characters do get cool moments, none really get development, except the villain, and surprisingly Usopp. Though when you think about it, characters getting development doesn't really matter in this film, since it isn't actually canon. So none of their development would even carry over anyways. The movie was definitely a fun time, and I would recommend watching it to any One Piece fan. Even my brother, who doesn't even watch One Piece, said he enjoyed it. He liked all of the zany characters, even though he had no idea who the hell any of them were, and said the plot was simple enough to follow for someone who knows nothing about the world of One Piece. So if you have a friend who hasn't seen One Piece, they could probably enjoy it along with you. I wouldn't take your grandparents, though. I don't think they would know what the hell is going on, and they may be frightened of all the crazy cartoon characters. As a standalone movie, I would give it about a 5 or 6 out of 10. Now fan, thumbs down! I know a lot of you may think that's low, but when you really look at it, the movie isn't anything crazy. It's heavily carried by excellent visuals and fan service, but it doesn't really have much depth. However, that doesn't mean your experience will be limited to a 5 or 6. I think depending on how much of a fan you are, this film could rate as high as an 8. As if you love all the characters from One Piece, you'll have a lot to enjoy here. I'm sure some of the people screaming out in my theater were having a 10 out of 10 time. It was definitely an enjoyable experience, so don't think me rating it so low means I thought it wasn't a fun time. This is your Weeaboo warning. I will now be getting into spoilers for One Piece Stampede. So, if you haven't watched the movie yet and want to see it without having anything getting spoiled, this is your time to leave. For the spoilers section, I will go through the movie from beginning to end, giving my thoughts on it. The time for spoilers starts now. Fake fan. I like the creepy atmosphere of the opening scene and how it explained how Blackbeard was the one who released the main villain Bullet from Impel Downs. This makes the movie feel more connected with the main continuity, even if it really isn't. After the opening shot, the next part of the film was the Pirate Festival, where we see a bunch of familiar faces. I thought the idea of them fighting to get Roger's treasure on top of an island that was being blasted high into the sky by a water current was a fun idea, but that part of the movie didn't really last long. Pretty quickly into the festival, Bullet showed up and threw a ship into the floating island, blowing it up. All of the pirates came raining down in the debris, with the Devil Fruit users, including Luffy, needing to be saved by their crewmates after falling into the water. All of the headliners from the worst generation ended up facing off against Bullet, but none of them really stood a chance against him except Gear 4 Luffy. He started off with Snake Man, which I don't think was the best choice, as Bullet was more of a bruiser rather than a speedster, so I think the stronger but slower Bound Man would have been better, which is backed up later as Luffy does quite a bit better in that form against Bullet when he uses it. But the movie probably just wanted to show off both of his forms, and I do think it was a good idea from a movie perspective to do so. Bullet then decided to use his Devil Fruit power to beat them all. His Devil Fruit power is definitely interesting, and you wouldn't actually think it would be as powerful as it was. His power is to combine and reform materials, and he used that power to transform a ship into a large battle suit, which he used to easily defeat all the pirates who confronted him. But what's really scary about his powers is his awakening. He was able to absorb all the ships and other material around him to form a giant monster the size of a mountain. This form was so powerful, he was able to split a portion of the island apart with just a single punch. At this point, practically nothing could touch him, so the Navy who showed up to the party decided to do a buster call. They had to give some time for their own forces to leave, so while they were waiting for the buster call, Luffy, Law, Sabo, Smoker, Boa, and a few others all worked together to try and take Bullet down. With Law's plan, they were able to weaken Bullet's defenses, and Luffy came in with a massive King Kong gun, which was probably the strongest attack we've ever seen him do, to match and destroy Bullet's awakening monstrosity. Usopp then came in clutch, destroying Bullet's ship mech with seeds he planted earlier, which allowed Luffy to take on Bullet one final time, man to man, where he eventually won, partially due to the fact he weakened Bullet's resolve. Luffy finally got a hold of Roger's treasure, which was an eternal pose to Laugh Tale, and in typical Luffy fashion, he decided to destroy it because he didn't want the easy way to get there. This was to be expected, because even though the movie doesn't fit directly into the story, they wanted to somewhat make sense, and it would just be weird to have the movie end with Luffy and the others heading off to Laugh Tale. Just like a filler episode, the movie basically ends just how it started. There was a lot of the plot that I cut out, so I'm going to go over some of the major characters of the film and talk about some of their moments. I basically talked about most of Luffy's important events in my plot summary, so I'll be skipping him. Out of all the Straw Hats besides Luffy, Usopp probably had the most to do in this film. At one point in the film, he got his hands on Roger's treasure. He tried fighting Bullet, destroying one of his mech's fingers with one of his plants, and later ripped apart the entire thing. He saved Luffy from some fiery debris falling over, and even had some character growth, realizing he had a place among the Straw Hats even though he was weak. Though I feel like I've seen this plotline before in the main story somewhere. Zoro got some cool scenes, the highlight being him fighting Admiral Fujitora and cutting a meteor he brought down in half. Mihawk then completely destroyed the meteor, showing Zoro he still had a ways to go. Sanji fought Smoker for a bit, but he really didn't get to do much. Nami used Zeus to electrocute people, but that's about it. Chopper bandaged some people up, but he also did pretty much nothing. I don't remember Robin doing much besides helping their submarine touch down with her hand wings. Brook used his soul leaving his body power a few times and helped Usopp and Luffy when the fiery debris were falling down on them, but he also didn't have much screen time. And all I remember Frankie doing was piloting the ship and shooting a laser beam. Law was one of the primary characters who wasn't a Straw Hat, and he was basically the brains of the operation. He worked along with Luffy and the others to try and defeat Bullet in the climax, but unfortunately for him, Luffy's idea of working together was just him launching himself at Bullet over and over again. Boa actually had one of the most impressive feats in the movie. After Bullet hurt Luffy, she went full-on yandere, and went in to straight-up murder Bullet. She kicked him so hard, she noticeably shook and cracked his entire mountain-sized construct protected by armament hockey. I remember someone even screaming, "What?" and a bunch of other surprised reactions in the theater during that scene. Even though he's a Marine, Smoker ended up helping them too, and Sabo was there as well to help. Crocodile and Lucci got a few short scenes fighting against Bullet as well. Buggy was one of the characters with more screen time, and I'm fine with that as he's one of the funniest characters in One Piece in my opinion. Of course, practically every scene he was in, he was pretty much being crapped on. But the amazing Captain Buggy was the one who got to Roger's treasure first. Everyone else just stole it from him. All of the headliners of the Worst Generation were in it and had some action scenes, with Kid probably getting the most focus out of all of them besides Law. But after the initial fight with Bullet, they didn't really show up much. Foxy and Wapple were also in it for a bit, but who cares about them? They don't look important. There were some movie original characters, but the only ones who were actually noteworthy were the two villains. The Mastermind was basically just an attention hog that was jealous of Roger and who wanted to create a new era, while Bullet just wanted to be the strongest. The Mastermind really didn't get much of a backstory or explanation, but Bullet had a small backstory given to us, and we learned he wanted to become the strongest because he was abandoned and betrayed by pretty much everyone he knew. So he thought his own strength was the only thing he could rely on. During the final clash, Luffy made him realize, at least subconsciously, that he wouldn't have made it as far as he did if it wasn't for others, and he had a flashback of Roger. Due to his inner doubt, Luffy ended up taking the advantage and finally put a stop to his rampage. Bullet wasn't the most complex character, but I thought he was a pretty cool villain, and he worked well as the main antagonist of this film. You know what? I agree with him. Power's everything. So subscribe to give me more power! Join my Weeaboo crew and help me become the Weeaboo King. I'm gonna become the Weeaboo King and no one can stop me! Gear forth! Weeaboo Man! What a pathetic freaking loser. You won't get any pussy like that. As expected from someone who gets all his exercise while watching hentai.